Inside the walls of millions of older homes, there is a hidden history, a story written in wire. But sometimes, these old stories can pose some very, very modern dangers. Today, we're going to pull back the plaster and take a hard look at an electrical system that time and technology has pretty much left behind.
So let me just ask you this straight up. If your home has that classic pre-war charm, built any time before the 1950s, have you ever really stopped to wonder what's connecting your lights and outlets? What is the original electrical lifeblood of your house?
Well, for a surprising number of you, the answer isn't just some old wiring. It's an entirely different kind of electrical system, something that was absolutely state-of-the-art back in the day, but today, it's a huge red flag for pretty much every insurer and safety expert out there.
And that red flag has a name: knob and tube wiring. So let's dive in and figure out what it actually is, and more importantly, how you can tell if it's what's powering your home.
Okay, so knob and tube, or KNT as it's often called, was the gold standard for wiring homes for nearly half a century. And its name is just brilliantly simple, because it literally just describes its two main parts: these white porcelain knobs that hold the wires up, and porcelain tubes that act as sleeves to protect the wires when they go through wood.
So take a look at this diagram. It shows you the design, which was actually pretty clever for its time. See how the hot and the neutral wires are kept completely separate? They're suspended in open air by those ceramic knobs. That air gap, well, that was the original way they got rid of heat, and the tubes are just there to keep the wires from touching the wood frame of the house.
But that was then. Today, this century-old system creates a major problem. It puts your home's history on a collision course with the demands of modern life, especially when it comes to your safety and your ability to even get home insurance.
Let's start with where it often hits first: your wallet. For a lot of homeowners, the very first sign they have a problem is when they try to get insurance. Insurers see active KNT wiring as such a big risk that they'll often just refuse to cover the house at all, or they'll charge your premiums that are 2, even 3 times higher than normal. That's a huge ongoing expense.
So why are they so freaked out about it? Well, it really boils down to a few key things. First, there's no ground wire, which is a critical modern safety feature we'll talk about in a sec. Second, the insulation on these wires is 80, 90, 100 years old. It gets brittle, it crumbles, it can literally turn to dust. Third, these circuits were never ever designed to handle our modern lifestyle. Microwaves, big screen TVs, computers, all that stuff. And finally, over a century, you get a lot of questionable DIY fixes that can leave a tangled and really dangerous mess in your walls.
This picture right here gets to the absolute heart of the safety problem. On the left, you've got the old 2-prong outlet from a KNT system. On the right, the modern 3-prong outlet. That third hole, that third prong, that's for the ground wire. Think of it like an emergency exit for electricity. If something goes wrong, the ground wire gives that dangerous electricity a safe path away from you and your stuff. Without it, you can become the path to ground, and that leads to a serious risk of shock and fire.
Now, to be fair, the Electrical Safety Authority, the ESA, they do say that KNT isn't inherently dangerous. But, and this is a huge but, look at those conditions. Provided it's been perfectly maintained by a pro. Provided no one's ever added any new outlets to the circuit. After 80 or 100 years, that is a really, really big if.
So, if you're sitting there right now thinking you might have KNT, what's the path forward? Well, the good news is there's a really clear, established process for upgrading your home to modern standards, making it both way safer and totally insurable.
The whole upgrade process basically follows this clear 4-step path. It all starts with getting a professional in to assess exactly what you're dealing with. From there, they'll make a plan to replace the old wires. This almost always means you've got to upgrade your main electrical panel to a modern breaker box, and then the whole project gets signed off with an official safety inspection.
And I gotta stress this, step 1 is totally non-negotiable. In places like Ontario, it's actually required by law that this kind of work is done by a licensed electrical contractor. Don't mess around with this stuff. These are the pros who know how to do it safely.
Now, I know the biggest fear for so many people is the thought of just destroying their beautiful old home, tearing down plaster walls. But check out what this homeowner on Reddit had to say. It's often a big misconception. Skilled electricians, they specialize in fishing new wires with minimal damage. They'll cut a few small, easily patched holes instead of gutting entire rooms. It's not the demolition job you might be picturing.
Of course, all of this leads to the big question, right? What does this kind of investment in safety, and frankly in your peace of mind, actually cost?
This table gives us a really solid ballpark, using Ontario as an example. For a smaller home, you're probably looking at somewhere between $8,000 and $12,000. For a bigger house, yeah, it can get up over $25,000. And don't forget, you've got to factor in the cost of that new electrical panel, which is almost always a part of the job.
At the end of the day, it really just boils down to this choice. On one side, you've got the one-time cost of replacing it. But on the other, you've got all the ongoing costs and risks of keeping it. Sky-high insurance, the fire and shock hazards, and just not being able to plug in your modern stuff without worrying. It's a calculation of upfront cost versus long-term security.
Look, there's no doubt that knob and tube wiring is a fascinating part of your home's story. It's a genuine relic from a different era. But when you think about the risks to your safety, to your wallet, and to your peace of mind, the real question you have to ask yourself is this a piece of history you can really afford to keep?